Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to talk about honeybees and beehives because this is a symbol of the church. Um, you see it in a few different places, and I want to show you some of those right now. And I think there's some interesting symbolism behind this. I think that there's um, some more surface level symbolism and things that are deeper. Um, I'm going to be looking at a bunch of different things here. First, I'm going to go through like a whole bunch of different examples of where we see the beehive in the church. Uh, also, want to look at some things that are said by Joseph Fielding Smith and Bruce R. McConkie because I think that beyond just the surface level, there's more to this when it comes to families, celestial families, and it's really, really interesting. We're also going to be looking at honey. This is a product produced by bees, and there's a lot of really interesting things about that. So it's just going to be, no pun intended, it's just going to be so stupid. it's it's gonna it's gonna be interesting. Okay, so let's start with this. You come to Utah and you're driving, and this is what you'll see for the state like highway signs, what state highway you're on, and the symbol is a beehive, right? And here's like a whole list of all the different all the different highways, state highways in Utah, but they all have the beehive symbol, and that's typical for any given state. They have like whatever their state symbol is, and they have that as like the highway sign. So for Utah, it's the beehive, right? You look at the Utah National Guard. Now, I don't know exactly what unit this is for. It's not like the Utah National Guard is one big unit. It's made up of different units. Um, but anyway, for one of those units, they have their patch for the Utah National Guard um, as a beehive with a bee. And this is it right here. I wish it said the unit. I'd be interested to know. But I know that there's at least a few different patches because there's a few different units. You look at the Utah National Guard um, emblem or whatever, and you have like the first. Okay, if you don't know what the National Guard is, for my foreign viewers, you have um, the main military, which has 6 branches. Okay, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and now Space Force, which is the most recently created one. Within the Army, it's divided into 3 components. You have active Army. Okay, those are the ones that actually do it as their job. You know, 5 days a week. Well, I guess every day of the week, but like they go to work 5 days a week and they work full time. So the active Army, and then you have the reserves, and then you have the reserves are funded by the federal government. The National Guard is like the reserves in that they only meet once a month over a weekend, and then usually they'll do like a field training exercise once a year for like a few weeks, like 2 weeks. So they kind of operate the same, the reserves in the National Guard, but the difference is the reserves is funded by the national federal government, and the National Guard is funded by the states. Okay, and all the different National Guards, there's one for each, state, and they all have this symbol. I think this is a Minuteman. But anyway, for the Utah National Guard, they incorporated, the mountains in the background, and then you have the beehive down here. Okay. Um, okay, moving on up at the state capitol, they have this big thing right here, this kind of sculpture thing. Let me zoom in. It says industry. Utah is known as the Beehive State, and what that's referring to, again, for my foreign viewers, each state has like a nickname that it goes by. In some cases, there's like a few different nicknames. So, for example, I lived in Arizona. I highlighted the places where I've lived. So, Arizona is the Grand Canyon state. Kansas is the Sunflower State, and an alternative nickname is the Jayhawker State. not going to go into the explanation of that, but the sunflower state, which I love. That's why I use the sunflower for my channel. I love Kansas. I love homesteading here. And Jenica's favorite flower, and now mine, is the sunflower. Missouri is the show me state, as in, like, if you're going to tell me something, you need to show me, which is kind of interesting because that's not how faith works. Okay, so like on that level, it's like that's not how we approach the gospel. We do it as far as like praying, like read the Book of Mormon, pray, and then the Spirit shows you. So in that sense, yes, but um, I've heard this so many times in my life. People from Missouri, they're like, "Hey, I'm from Missouri. Show me. Don't tell me. Like, I need to see it." Um, Texas, of course, a lot of people know this. This is the Lone Star State. It has to do with their state history, um, leaving Mexico and joining the United States. And then Utah, the Beehive State. Okay. So, the state flag for Utah, right? You got the beehive front and center with American flags on either side, industry at the top. And this is like kind of like the surface level symbolism of the beehive and bees is them and ants, which ants and bees are really closely related. Um, it, I mean, bees are basically ants with wings, essentially. Um, but anyway, they're known for being workers. You always see them working, and they come across as industrious. So industry, right? And there's more to that. I'm going to get into like some of the history. I don't know if you knew, but they did for the state of Utah. I've never been a big fan of this flag. Never. Uh, Not so much because of the symbolism, but just because I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called vexology. Vexology flags. Oh, vexology. In vexology, it's the study of flag. Only dorks like me know this, and I know this because of graphic design because I do a lot of things that involve flags. But vexillology is the study of flags and what makes a good flag. And there's a few general rules. One is that it should be simple enough that a kindergartner can roughly, you know, make it with crayons or chalk or something like that. Simplicity, okay, not having a whole bunch of like different elements. And so for that reason, even before I knew about vexillology, I was never a big fan just because, flags stand out. When you look at, let's see, U.S. state flags. Sorry, this is getting a little off topic, but when you look at the different flags, like look, Alabama, that's easily recognizable. Um, Alaska, also, it kind of like indicates to you that they're at the top of the world. They're close to the quote unquote close to the North Star because they're so far north. Arizona has an amazing flag, and this is very recognizable. So is the Colorado state flag. So is the Texas state flag. So some of these flags, here's the Texas state flag. Some of these flags are really good and recognizable, and you can kind of like take pride of them. Like I'm from South Carolina. Everyone knows the palmetto and the moon. Um, but you look at like South Dakota right here, and it's a mess. It's like a painted scene, like the landscape, which is nice, but for the purposes of a flag, if I saw, I didn't even know that this is what the South Dakota flag looked like until just now. I've seen it before, but Nebraska, Kansas isn't really that good either. It's at least it says in big letters Kansas at the bottom, so you don't have to guess. And oh, okay, that's Kansas. Um, so some are really good, some are not. And so with the Utah state flag, I think they've been wanting to change it. In fact, they have. They did this where it's like a commemorative flag, which this looks amazing. This is a good flag. It's simple, it's easy to draw, it's recognizable, and it's not cluttered with a bunch of words and details, right? But this was just like a commemorative flag. We've actually talked about this before on the channel. Well, I just found out as I was doing this video, it looks like I don't know. This came out just 3 days ago. Look at what may be the new Utah state flag, November 1st. So this at the time of this recording. I'm doing this on the 5th, so this is like 4 days ago. It looks like maybe this. I'm not going to read through the story, but this is also very, very good. This is very good because you have the mountains in the background, which is a symbol of Utah. You have the beehive, and I like that it's in a hexagonal shape because uh, that's the shape that um, like in a beehive the cells are in there. They're in the shape of a hexagon. So that's really cool. This is a very good flag. I would be proud of this. I might even buy merchandise that has this if this becomes the state flag, because then I can be like, look, I'm from Utah. Um, so anyway, the beehive. Okay. Um, Now you look at the sports teams. This is the Salt Lake Bees. Um, this is like a minor league baseball team, and a lot of people like to go to Bees games. I've never actually been to one, but anyway, you have the Bees. They used to be called. They used to be called, and this is like when I was in. Well, no, I was there for the Bees, but I grew up with the Buzz. It used to be the Salt Lake Buzz, but then it changed to, which I didn't know this, the Stingers, and then after that, the Bees. So they had to change from the Buzz. I think I remember it's because there was like a copyright issue, a trademark issue, so they had to change it. But it was the Buzz. All right. Um, Another interesting thing. What just as like a little side topic, I had to show you this in case you're not familiar with Utah. Utah, at least when I was there and growing up, it had a bunch of. Let me zoom out. Okay, and then zoom back in. It had a bunch of teams that had two Z's in the name. So you had the Utah Jazz with two Z's. You had the Salt Lake Buzz. So basketball, professional basketball, minor league baseball, the Utah Grizzlies with two Z's right here for a part of like minor league uh, hockey. The Utah Stars, because at this point now they made it a thing. It's like, oh, we're gonna do the Stars, and so it has two Z's, and then here's like the rest of them. So here's a couple teams here that had a Z in it, but not a double Z, like the Utah Blaze, which they were awesome. It was a indoor arena football team. They had a really cool um, logo. But anyway, this is like this. I had to point this out, and because of that, there's this sporting shop, like sports apparel shop that you'll find in Utah malls, and I think they've expanded outside of Utah, but they're called Fans with two Z's because of that. So just an interesting thing if you didn't know. Here's like the Wikipedia page for it. I don't need to keep this up. Okay. Okay. Now this is a picture that I took. I'm not. This is a while ago. This must have been like 2006, maybe 2007, that I took of the doorknob of the Salt Lake Temple, the front door. And there you go. You have a beehive right there, and then holiness to the Lord around it. Beehive on the temple, on the temple. Um, on the conference center pulpit that President Gordon B. Hinckley donated because he had a tree and they used the wood from the tree, from his property. They made it into this pulpit, and it has carvings of beehives, two on the sides and then three in the front. Okay, on top of the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, which is on the block that's to the east of Temple Square. At the very top of it, and this is the building that I guess the brethren are meeting in for their meetings. At the top of it, there's a big beehive. There's a big beehive up here. Okay. Um, Now we know that one place that this comes from. Now there's always going to be like the masonry connection because the beehive is also a symbol in masonry. And like I said, that's not something that I shy away from. I think that there were things that were preserved in masonry that were able to be restored to the church. Um, I'm not going to go into that. but it's meant this is mentioned the bees and bees and beehives, they're mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Everybody knows this. This is where we get the word Deseret. So in Ether chapter 2, as they're getting ready to go to their promised land, it says in verse 3, and they did also carry with them Deseret, which by interpretation is honeybee. And thus they did carry with them swarms of bees, which is really cool. And it's an interesting little thing in the Book of Mormon that for some reason, even though it has like they have other things that they're taking with them, flocks, fowls, fish, da 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 da. For some reason, they single out the honeybee. And again, I think I know why, and I think I know why this is such a important symbol for the church. And I think, like I said, I think there's a few different layers to it. But anyway, we get this really interesting thing here where you have Deseret. And actually, now that I think about it, because Jared and the brother of Jared and their families, since their language wasn't confounded, this must be uh no pun intended. This must be this must be a word from the pure Adamic language. I can only assume. And so that means, as far as I know, the only words that we have from the pure Adamic language are there's Adam, Andai, Amen. So we have those three. And then we also have Deseret. And I'm trying to think if if there's like more. Let me know in the comments below. But I think those are the only ones. I just thought about that just right now. So that's interesting. Deseret. It's one of the few words that have been preserved from the pure Adamic language. Wow. That's fascinating. So that might kind of impress on your mind the importance of this symbol. Um, so Deseret. Now, if you didn't know, I'm sure most of you do. Um, this is actually, it seems that it's actually a real word. It says right here, Latter-day Saint scholar Hugh Nibley, extending the work of Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardiner, suggested an etymology. Etymology is like where a word comes from, by associating the word Deseret with the ancient Egyptian bird hand eye, a term referring to bee crown or the lower kingdom. Oh, here's like the shortened version. So it's like DSRT, districts, because like in Egyptian they kind of like Hebrew, they don't have the vowels, if I remember right. You only write the consonants. So DSRT, district. So yeah, very close. Very possible. The same thing. Deseret, Egyptian. Okay, moving on. Um, in the beginning, when the church had made it to Utah, uh, the intention was to make the state of Deseret. That's what they wanted to call it, not Utah. Utah was not chosen by the saints. It would have been Deseret if everything had gone through. I want to read a few things here. Notice this flag right here. I've done a video about this. This is the flag of the Kingdom of God. If you're better pull this up. If you're wanting to know more about that, I did an entire video just about this flag right here. The flag of the Kingdom of God. Joseph Smith, Ensign Peak, and comparing flags with the Israeli flag. And here we talk a little bit about the Council of 50. So I'll put this in the description below. I would highly recommend this video because I think it's really interesting. Hopefully you do too. Anyway, going back here to the state of Deseret. The state of Deseret was a provisional state of the United States, proposed in 1849. So it was 2 years after they got to the Salt Lake Valley, by settlers from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City. The provisional state existed for slightly over 2 years and was never recognized by the United States government. Now look at the boundaries of this thing. This encompasses, let me make it big. This encompasses more than half of the state of Arizona, some of New Mexico, maybe about a quarter of Colorado. Looks like, isn't Yellowstone? No, Yellowstone's like more up here, I think. Anyway, this corner of Wyoming, corner of Idaho, almost the entire state of Nevada, and then all the way up into Oregon, which that's kind of surprising. That's pretty far up there. All the way up into Oregon, and then down, kind of shaving off the eastern part of California, and then Southern California, which would include the San Diego and Los Angeles areas. And as far as Phoenix, I think Phoenix is maybe a little bit more south of this line. Definitely Tucson. Tucson's further south, but um, so anyway, this would have been like if everything had gone through the way that they wanted, this would have been the state of Deseret. Very interesting. Okay. Um, let's see. The proposal for the state was considered by some to be too ambitious to succeed in Congress, even disregarding the controversy over the Mormon practice of polygamy. Um, and that's one thing that kind of, yeah, that was kind of like an issue as they wanted Utah to become a state, which is kind of interesting because I'm going to talk a little bit about this topic, and I know it's not the favorite thing of a lot of people, but I'm going to talk a little bit about this toward the end of the video. After the establishment of the Utah Territory, the Latter-day Saints did not relinquish the idea of a state of Deseret. And then here it shows the Utah Territory. Let's see, the Utah Territory is shown in blue, while the proposed state of Deseret is outlined by the dotted line. Modern state boundaries underlaid for reference. Yeah, so this became official, the territory of Utah. Okay. The idea of creating a state based on Mormonism began to fade away after the coming of the railroad, which opened the territory to many non-Mormon settlers, particularly in the western areas of the territory. Brigham Young and the LDS Church supported the railroad, even taking members that were working on the Salt Lake Temple and reassigning them to work on the railroad. The driving of the Golden Spike, just 66 miles from Salt Lake City, completed the first transcontinental railroad at Promontory Summit in 1869. And hopefully you're familiar with this story. This is where, like it said, the very first railroad that went across the country, the continent, uh, from one side to the other, it actually met in Utah, of all places. And I think that that's pretty interesting and symbolic because you have kind of like this symbol of people traveling from the east, people traveling from the west, and meeting in Utah. Even though that's not, I mean, here's the point where they met up, right? And they drove a gold spike here, and there's like a state park or something. I've been there before. I think it's just like a state park where you can go there and see the historic sites. But it's very interesting that that occurred, right? And I don't know all the benefits and fallout from that. The reason why it was harder for them to, because like they came from the east, but that's easier because it's like plains and it's not mountainous like it is over here in the west. Okay, there's a lot of mountains over here. There's like the Sierra Nevadas over here, and there's other mountains, so it's harder coming from the west. So that's why it ended up in Utah. But anyway, okay, that's it for that one. Promontory Utah. Okay, I don't know if you knew this, but there was an attempted Deseret alphabet, which was, it says here, it was by the Board of Regents of the University of Deseret, which later became the University of Utah. But that was the first name of it, University of Deseret of Honeybees. In public statements, Brigham Young claimed that Brigham Young claimed the alphabet was intended to replace the traditional Latin alphabet with an alternative, more phonetically accurate alphabet for the English language. And we all know that English is just jacked up. It's just jacked up. I wish that this had actually worked spread throughout the world. Or I wish that we would just take the current Latin characters and let's just spell English words correctly so that they match the letters. You don't have this problem in Spanish and in other languages. Um, you know, some are worse than others, but English is just it's silly. For accurate, why do you have to have two C's? Why are there two C's there? Why do you have to have an E at the end? Why can't you just have the A be in a specific character that makes a sound, you know, or accurate. In fact, this should be turned to an E. This should be E. This should be A C ac u. I don't know. Uh, Y O O R E. Oh, just please, for the sake of just some. Okay, hopefully in the millennium, we're going to have the pure Adamic language and we're not going to have to deal with this. So, anyway, Brigham Young and the early saints try to fix this. Good idea. It says this would offer immigrants an opportunity to learn to read and write English, he said. The orthography of which is often less phonetically consistent than those of many other languages. Yeah. Similar neographies have been uncommon. The most well known for English is the Shavian alphabet. So here's somebody else that tried to fix it. It almost looks a little bit like Hebrew. Like there's one character I see there that looks like the Lamed. Anyway, uh, the Deseret alphabet was an outgrowth of Brigham Young's in the early LDS church's idealism and utopianism. Yeah, because the idea was to create Zion, to have a Zion society, and yeah, uh, Brigham Young and the Mormon pioneers believed, quote unquote, all aspects of life were in need of reform. Yeah, they're right. It's true. And the Deseret alphabet was just one of many ways they sought to bring about a complete, quote unquote, transformation in society. And too bad that didn't work out. During the alphabet's heyday between 1854 and 1869, books, newspapers, street signs, and correspondence used the new letters. But despite heavy and costly promotion by the early church, the alphabet never enjoyed prolonged, widespread use and has been regarded by historians as a failure. So it has like if you go down here in the Wikipedia article, it actually has what it looked like, right? Um, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of some of these characters, so maybe it's like for the better. I don't know. So they're okay. I don't know. I don't know what like a perfect like alphabet looks like. I'm actually pretty happy with the Latin alphabet just because I think it looks really nice and uniform. But yeah. Anyway, so I like the Hebrew alphabet too, by the way. So anyway, yeah, there was an attempted Deseret alphabet. That's what they were going to name it, Deseret. Um, here are coins that were used. I was reading what these were used for. It was like a whatever. I don't know, but this one I think it. Well, no, this has the $5 coin, and here you have a lion, right? And then around it you have the Deseret alphabet. And then on the flip side of the coin, you have a beehive with an eagle. So there's that. Um, Many people know that we have Deseret Industries. This is run by the church. It's basically like, if you don't know what this is, it's like a Goodwill. Um, it's like a thrift store type thing where people donate everything from furniture to electronics to clothing to books to just everything, toys, clothes. And then it's sold for a cheaper price, and it's meant to benefit the poor. Um, and so the church has one of the or has these. I don't know how many different locations there are. I wonder if it. No, it probably doesn't show it here. They had them down in Arizona. Sometimes it's just called the DI, But in the logo, they have the beehive and a honeybee. Of course, there's Deseret News in the Salt Lake area or in Utah. There's kind of like two main newspapers. One is the Salt Lake Tribune, and they're pretty hostile toward the church. And then you have the Deseret News, and this is owned by the church, and yeah, so it's not against the church. Although I feel like there's been a few questionable articles that have popped up, but anyway, and it has the beehive as its logo. There's also Deseret Book. Okay. Uh, in Utah and Arizona, and I'm not sure how many other places. When you when you're ordering your temple clothes, you okay, because like most people in the United States probably do it via internet. I don't know what they did before the internet, but you you know there's actually physical locations that you can go to. And typically, what it is you'll have a distribution center, which is where you buy temple clothes. And then right there connected to it, you'll have a Deseret Book. So you'll have the Deseret Book. They sell everything from, books to movies to music to journals and just all sort. Here's some like jewelry. It's a really great place. And every time I go into Deseret Book, and it's been a while because last time I went was in Arizona. Every time I go in, I feel the spirit. Like it feels good inside there. And then usually, well, the one in Arizona, I think you went into the Deseret Book. That was the main entrance, and then you'd go toward like the back or to the left. It's the one in Gilbert. The one to go to the left, and it would go into the distribution center. So the distribution center didn't have like a separate entrance in that case. So it's a really great place to go. It's there's a lot of good materials. Of course, you're gonna have some books and stuff that are people's opinions or they're trying to push a theory or whatever. But I feel like it's a very uplifting place to go, and it's owned by the church. Um, okay, so lots of bee symbolism, lots of beehive symbolism. So now I want to look at some of the interesting things about bees and honey, and then go into the symbolism afterwards. Okay, so this is Bees Universe, um, and I highlighted some of the interesting things here. Okay, so this is about honey. It is the only, okay, so bees are the only insect that produce food eaten by man. That's interesting. Now, yeah, you can eat insects themselves, but as far as insects producing the food and then you eating it, they're the only ones that make something that we eat. So when you think about symbolism, like there's a lot of like food symbolism in the scriptures. And usually it has to do with the harvest, right? We talk about the harvest all the time. We talk about your body being like a literal temple, and how what you put into your temple, like you need to be careful with that, and you should treat it right. So the fact that we have this special food that's produced by, and it's only produced by, out of all the insects, the only one that produces it are bees. There's something to that, and I'm going to show you some more about that. Okay, honey is the only food that includes all the substances necessary to sustain life, including enzymes, vitamins, minerals, and water. And it's the only food that contains pinosembrin, pinosembrin, an antioxidant associated with improved brain function. So, the brain is important. In the body of your temple, the brain is like the holy of holies, essentially. Well, your head is the holy of holies. The brain is like your Ark of the Covenant, with like the two angels. This is just in my opinion from what I've studied, so I'm not saying that that's official, but um, it's interesting that it has all that's necessary to sustain life. Now, I've read other things. You should not just eat honey. That's that's not what we're trying to communicate here. Do not attempt to only survive off of honey, but it has a lot of really good things in it. Um, Here's an interesting thing. It says here, okay, the queen bee can live up to 5 years, and its role is to fill the hive with eggs. She is the busiest in the summer months, and we're going to talk more about the actual hive itself, but we're still kind of just like talking about honey. But anyway, when the hive needs to be at its maximum strength, she lays up to 2,500 eggs per day. The queen bee has control over whether she lays male or female eggs. If she uses stored sperm to fertilize the egg, the larva that hatches is female. If the egg is left unfertilized, the larva that hatches is male. That's interesting. In other words, the female bees inherit genes from their mothers and their fathers, while the male bees inherit only genes from their mothers. So that's I just thought I'd highlight that because I don't know if there could be something there, because at this point, as we're starting to consider the symbolism, um, I would want to propose this idea that essentially you look at the queen bee as like a celestial female, one who a woman, a sister in the church that has obtained exaltation, okay, and she's creating her world, and um, and then of course the male bees would be, males that are exalted, um, and then I'm going to talk more about the workers and stuff, but let's continue. Okay, larger than worker bees, the male honeybees, also called drones, have no stinger and do not work at all. All they do is mating. In fact, before winter or when food becomes scarce, the female honeybees usually force surviving males out of the out of the nest. So male bees consume a lot, so they can be a drain on resources. All right, that's it for that. Here's another one. Idaho Honey Industry Association. Okay, fun facts about honey. Honey is the only food that includes all the substances necessary to sustain life, including water. Sorry, some of these are repeats, but I just want to show you it's not just from one site. Honey is the only form of sugar that does not need to be refined. This is interesting. It's like it's like it's pure. That's the only way that I can really think of that. It's not in need of refinement. Honeybees, um, and I don't know. I think you could think about honey as kind of like the gospel. Um, it sustains you. You eat it. It becomes part of you. I think it's like the gospel. You can think of honey like the gospel, which makes these facts about honey all the more interesting. Honeybees are a great scientific mystery because they have remained unchanged for 20 million years, even though the world has changed around them. Well, that's something to think about, right? What that implies is that their way of life, the way that they're organized, um, works, and it's stable. It's stable, right? When we think about the family unit, right, we know that family units are the building blocks of society and civilization, and they provide stability. Okay. Yes, there's dysfunctional families, but I think even sometimes in those families, it's more stable than some of the alternatives. Maybe not in all cases, but um, it's interesting that honeybees, this symbol of the church, they have not had to change, according to science, for over 20 million years. So while everybody else is having to adapt and change and to survive, not honeybees. And with the gospel, there's nothing that needs to change. There's nothing that needs to adapt. The methods in the church, yes, like the procedures and stuff like that, but the gospel itself, no. No, 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 no. Okay, moving on. Honeybees are entirely um, herbivorous. Yeah, herbivorous, when they forage for nectar and pollen, but can cannibalize their own brood when stressed. But other, other than that, uh, they're herbivores. They're not predators like spiders and even ladybugs. Ladybugs are predators, and but they're a type of bug, a type of insect that are not. They're herbivorous. I don't know why I didn't highlight this one. Honey is a natural antibiotic. It speeds the healing process and combats infections. So healing, right? That's what the gospel is. It's healing. Um, it's about preventing spiritual infection. And with priesthood blessings, priesthood blessings can literally uh, combat infection if that's the will of the Lord. Okay, honey. Honey never spoils, and neither does the gospel. The gospel does not spoil. There's never going to be any universe anywhere where the gospel does not work. Where it's like, okay, it's not working anymore. We got to come up with another way of doing it. No, that's not going to happen. Honey never spoils. Honeybees are responsible for approximately 80% of all fruit, vegetable, and seed crops in the United States. And I'm sure that outside the United States, it's probably a similar percentage. We all know that honeybees are really important when it comes to pollination, and that's what this is talking about. They're vital. They're vital to us. So it's just this is a really important creature. This is from Mayo Clinic. Here's a few other things about honey. Honey contains mostly sugar, as well as a mix of amino acids, vitamins, minerals, iron, zinc, and antioxidants. In addition to its use as a natural sweetener, honey is used as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antibacterial agent. People commonly use honey orally to treat coughs and topically to treat burns and promote wound healing. So here's another one, so treating burns. Who would have thought? I didn't know that till now. Um, Research on honey for specific conditions includes cardiovascular disease. Antioxidants in honey might be associated with the reduced risk of heart disease. Cough. Studies suggest that eucalyptus honey, citrus honey, and labiate honey can act as a reliable cough suppressant for some people with upper respiratory infections and acute nighttime cough. And by the way, this is good when you have a sore throat. I've been dealing with that this year. I've had a couple times where I got really bad sore throat, and the honey helped, like putting it in like a herbal tea. Gastrointestinal disease. Evidence suggests honey might help relieve gastrointestinal tract conditions, such as diarrhea associated with enteritis. Honey might also be effective as part of oral rehydration therapy. Neurological disease. Studies suggest that honey might offer antidepressant, anticonvulsant, and anti-anxiety benefits. In some studies, honey has been shown to help prevent memory disorders. This seems like quite the wonder food. Wound care. Topical use of medical grade honey has been shown to promote wound healing, particularly in burns. All right. Now, this is something I was trying to find an authoritative source for this right here, what I'm about to say. I think that this is right. Okay. I remember hearing this one time. It must have been, I want to say it was like Elders Quorum when I was in my singles ward. I'm not sure though. But when it comes to honey, have you ever thought about this, or do you know like a better source for this? Because I wasn't able to find it. But on this blog right here, the person's talking about nothing dies for either of those. Okay, nothing dies for either of those things to be produced, meaning milk and honey. Sorry, milk and honey. Nothing dies for either of those things to be produced. So you could point to, fruit, nuts, um, eggs. But the thing about that is, well, if it's an unfertilized egg, I guess that would actually qualify as well. because those don't hatch. But nuts, that's like a potential new tree because nuts are like they're seeds. And then fruit contains seeds. So in that case, you are killing something. But with milk and honey, nothing is giving its life in order for you to eat. Um, well, I guess you could also say like salt because that's not or salt's not organic. I'm not really good with food, you guys. Like I don't tell anybody. I don't really do the cooking in our house. I've never been really big on cooking, so my knowledge is limited. But I don't know if you can think of other examples. Put it in the comments below. But that's one thing that's interesting. Milk and honey. Milk, it comes from a mother, and one who nourishes, right? Um, and we know that in the proclamation, the family, a proclamation to the world. You know, we learn there and other places that the mother is the primary one who rears her children, like in the gospel. The men do that too. Of course, fathers do that, but um, a home is essentially the way that I think of it, a woman's domain. That's like where she does her motherly work. And I'm not saying that you can't go and work and do things. I'm just saying that a home is a very sacred place, and I feel like the mother is the center of that home. Just the way that a queen bee is the center of the hive, right? And so anyway, milk, it's nourishing, it's for babies, it's for families, um, for raising families. And then honey, with everything that we've been reading, it's like the gospel. It's like nourishment and the gospel. Nourishment from parents, especially the mom, and the gospel. That's just I'm not saying that that's doctrine, but that's just like one way that I look at this. But I do remember someone making that comment that because you always hear the terms milk and honey. Like for example, this is out of a church manual. It's talking about the saints in New York and going to Ohio, and you know, this I get. Let's see, this is in DNC 38. Anyway, it uses the term. It promised the Latter Day Saints greater riches, even a land of promise, a land flowing with milk and honey, upon which there shall be no curse when the Lord cometh. So, this term has been used for promised lands, right? For Canaan, right? For in this case, it's actually talking about Zion. It's talking about the precise location of Zion. So this particular case is talking about New Jerusalem. But this is a term where it's like you're talking about going somewhere where, as a people, you can settle and you can rest and you can nurture each other, and you have these things, the gospel and nurture. This is how I read it, or how I kind of think of it. Nourishment, milk and honey, growing, thriving, surviving, thriving. Right? Okay. Now, I wanted to get into this right here. This is Viewpoint, Lesson of the Bees, the 10th of August, 2014. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Okay, this is in news, so church and then news. I just looked this up on the church web, or I just did a Google search and this came up, so I wasn't exactly sure what this was. But let me read you some of this. Honeybees, by instinct, spend their life pollinating, gathering nectar, and condensing that nectar into honey. Quote, it is estimated that to produce just 1 pound of honey, the average hive of 20,000 to 60,000 bees must collectively visit millions of flowers and travel the equivalent of 2 times around the world. Over its short lifetime of just a few weeks to 4 months, a single honeybee's contribution of honey to its hive is a mere 1/12 of a teaspoon. end quote, said Elder M. Russell Ballard of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles during his October 2012 General Conference address. Yet that small contribution is vital to the hive of the honeybees. The bees in the hive rely on each other. Quote, work that would be overwhelming for just a few bees to do becomes lighter because all the bees faithfully do their part. End quote. And that's kind of a key right there. We know that when it comes to salvation, the work of salvation and exaltation, we don't do it alone. We do not do it alone. We know that, the fathers need us and we need the fathers to be perfected and to be saved, right? From Malachi. They're depending on us to do their work in the temple so that they can accept it and then be resurrected when the time comes and ultimately gain their exaltation. And we have that responsibility to do that. And by doing that, we become connected to them and love them more. And eventually we will be all sealed together. But everyone does their part. Okay, the lesson of the bees is profound. When many people each do something small, together they accomplish something large. And you guys, that's how life works. When you want to do something big, you want to get some big project done. That's typically the pattern is you do it by small steps, just like long uh, a long chain of small steps. Um, and that's why I think there's a lot to that. I think that's why our time, the way that the Lord organized time, is the way that it is. That we have, it's divided up into days, 24-hour days, and then it's divided up into weeks and into months because um, that's what you do every day. You try and be a little better every day. If you're working on a project, you add a little bit more to that project, and through that repetition or through that frequency, because what it is frequency. Um, if you maintain a frequency of something, it builds up to something big, right? And so not only through time, like day by day, but also just people. If everybody's on the same frequency, meaning everyone's doing things and working toward a common goal, then all those frequencies together is going to bring about something really big. Okay, quote, you are, of course, surrounded by opportunities for service, said President Thomas S. Monson during the 2007 General Relief Society meeting. Quote, no doubt at times you recognize so many such opportunities that you may feel somewhat overwhelmed. Where do you begin? How can you do it all? How do you choose from all the needs you observe where and how to serve? Often small acts of service are all that is required to lift and bless another. A question concerning a person's family, quick words of encouragement, a sincere compliment, a small note of thanks, a brief telephone call. If we are observant and aware, and if we act on the promptings which come to us, we can accomplish much good. End quote. Okay, the beehive is a symbol of harmony, which is Zion, right? Zion is when we're of one heart, one mind, and we're all acting the same. And that's not to say that you lose your individuality. You definitely maintain your individuality because that's part of the glory of God is that we're all different. But the idea is to become all the same when it comes to our values or morals, the gospel, um, you know, being sealed together. That's where we're one, but you still have your individuality. The bee was a symbol of harmony, cooperation, and work for the early pioneers of the church. Brigham Young used the symbol to inspire early church members to work together to transform the barren Salt Lake Valley into a beautiful and thriving community. The beehive symbol was imprinted on the doors of the Salt Lake Temple, and the Beehive House, Brigham Young's official residence. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I thought it was called the Lion House. Hold on, let's solve this mystery. The Lion House, Salt Lake City. Is that just the restaurant? The Lion House is a large residence building in 1856 by Brigham Young, second president. Does it go by both names? You guys let me know unless I figure it out in this video. See, because like here you have a lion right here. It's really neat that he got to live right here. Here's a picture of it. Okay, well, let's see. The Beehive House. The Beehive House was one of the official residences of Brigham Young, the second president. Oh, and this is like connected to it. So let's see. Okay, so look. Here, there's the church office building, right? There's the Salt Lake Temple over there. And then in this southeast corner, so it's saying that this is the Beehive House. And look, there's a beehive on top. That's the Beehive House. And then, because like he had, I don't know, I don't remember how many wives, but he had like 26 or 28 or something like that, 27. So he had like a large area. So here, this is the Beehive House, and it has that nice beehive at the top. And then over here, looks like it's all connected. Over here is the Lion House. Okay, all right. All right, I got that straight. No one answer, unless you still want to. Okay, the beehive symbol was imprinted on the doors of the Salt Lake Temple. Okay, almost 170 years after the pioneers settled in the West, the symbol of the beehive was still Beehive still has great meaning for the church, a worldwide organization where millions of members do their small part each day to move the work forward. Quote, we read of the service church members provide around the world, and especially the humanitarian service given in times of crisis, fires and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes, end quote, said Elder Ballard during his 2012 General Conference address. Quote, these much needed and much appreciated emergency responses should certainly continue as a way of bearing one another's burdens. But what about our everyday lives? What would be the cumulative effect of millions of small, compassionate acts performed daily by us because of our heartfelt Christian love for others? Over time, this would have a transformative effect upon all of our Heavenly Father's children through the extension of His love to them through us. Our troubled world needs this love of Christ today more than ever, and it will need it even more in the years ahead. Well, we are currently in the years ahead at this point. We're now 10 years after this. These simple daily acts of service may not seem like much in and of themselves, but when considered collectively, they become just like the 1/12 teaspoon of honey contributed by a single bee to the hive. There is power in our love for God and for His children, and when that love is tangibly manifest in millions of acts of Christian kindness, it will sweeten and nourish the world with the life-sustaining nectar of faith, hope, and charity. And that's why, you guys, I would still encourage you, if you're feeling it, to do a YouTube channel or some kind of social media account, because you may not feel like you'll accomplish a lot, but you never know. Even just a little bit would be good. So I've been primarily asking sisters in the church if they want to do it, and I would promote them. You could come on here. I'll promote you because of Spencer W. Kimball's prophecy about the women right now. This was the main focus of the April 2022 General Conference Women's Session, where they played a video sharing that prophecy, how the women right now will be the ones that bring in large numbers of members into the church. So I want to try and help that along. So if you're a sister, I would definitely encourage you, if you're feeling it, let me know, contact me, send me an email. My email is in the description of every video, and we'll set it up. And if you're a dude, we can do it too. That's fine. Um, all right, so let's move on. Okay, now look at this. Now let's start to look at the actual colony or the hive. This is where I think things get really interesting. If we think about um, again, if we think about the queen as a celestially exalted woman, and the bees, or the male bees, which are called drones, as exalted men. Okay, and if we picture how the beehive is organized, how the colony is organized, and compare that to our eternal destinies. And actually, I think the first thing that I should read before that is this, to understand not so much our lives here on earth in mortality, but how things might be like in the eternities. Once everybody has received whatever kingdom of glory they're going to inherit, whether it's celestial, terrestrial, or telestial. There's a few interesting things I wanted to read from Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. Okay, so right here it says some of the functions of. Okay, so this is I had to read this. It kind of ties in, but okay, let me just read it. This comes from a different video though, where there was some kind of debate over this. Okay, Joseph Fielding Smith says some of the functions in the celestial body will not appear in the terrestrial body, neither in the telestial body, and the power of procreation will be removed. I take it that men and women will, in these kingdoms, be just what the so-called Christian world expects uh, all to be, neither man nor woman, merely immortal beings having received the resurrection. This is the only place that I've heard this. I think that we should give it special attention because it's coming from a prophet. It's not just like a general authority just giving an opinion. So I don't know. I haven't heard this other places, but it kind of makes sense to me. Again, it kind of makes sense because really what this is about, what we're doing in this life, is you're here to prove yourself. You're here to show how you treat the gifts and the power that you've been given. Okay, and why the reason why I say that, you can break that down into are you good, are you evil? But really what it comes down to is Heavenly Father wants to give us everything that he has, uh, up to and including his own power, right? The power to uh, have spirit children, the power to make worlds. But how could he give that to someone that's not going to adhere to very essential rules and laws, the laws of the gospel, right? You look at this world that we're in, and just any fool can have a child. Just any person out there uh, that's not even intending to have a child. And then once they do have a child, you see how different parents how they do their thing. Some are abusive, some are um, neglectful, right? And they don't take care of their creation. Um, some are, become like these dictator types and um, turn children into their slaves and their servants. So I feel like this is like a big thing. It's not just about how we treat others. That's like another big thing is we're meant to become a collective. And if you're not a community fish, sorry, you can't be part of this collective. You have to be a good person and you have to treat people kindly in the way that you want to be treated, and everyone should be equal. So it's like we're being tested on how we treat others within our community, our family, circle of friends, so on, and then specifically how we treat our offspring. You know, if you can't do it here, if you can't be a responsible parent, a kind, loving, nurturing parent here, Why in the world would you expect to be able to do that on a much, much, much grander scale? Because could you imagine if our Heavenly Father was just like some bum that's like doesn't have his life together, from the street, and we're at the mercy of this person, someone that's not going to take care of this world, that doesn't care at all what happens to you, or even worse than that, has all the power over you and is sadistic and decides to do horrible things. So that's why you can't just move on to the next life and have children. This is like the time when you go through like this test period and show who you really are and what you're going to do. So it makes perfect sense to me that those that prove themselves not worthy will not be able to procreate. And that's like the essential purpose of gender is creation, right? Some people in whatever the video was where I brought this up last time, they were like, no, I think you remain male and female. And that could be true, in a sense, but here it doesn't sound like that's Joseph Fielding Smith's view of it. You know, I propose the idea that it's kind of like how when you have a herd of cattle and you only want desirable traits to be passed on, you take the males and then you castrate them. They become steers, and then the ones that remain intact are bulls, and the bulls are the ones that breed, right? And that's essentially what's happening here. Is if you're someone that's good, you will continue. You will continue to procreate after this life. You have desirable traits. Those traits being living the gospel, keeping your covenants, being righteous, right? So I just thought I would share this, and this is something to think about. The reason why I'm bringing this up and how this even came up is because you want to think about this when we're talking about bees, because the only ones that procreate in a beehive, um, well, with a couple exceptions, I'll show you, but the ones that primarily procreate are the queen herself, and then the male bees. Okay. Here's another one. This is also Doctrines of Salvation. Are you teaching your children these truths, my brothers and sisters? Are you training them so that when they are married, they'll want to go to the house of the Lord? Are you teaching them so that they'll want to receive the great endowment which the Lord has in store for them? Have you impressed upon them the fact that they can be sealed as husbands and wives, and have bestowed upon them every gift and every blessing that pertains to the celestial kingdom, and thus they shall become the sons and daughters of God? And have you impressed upon them that great truth that if they are not married for time and eternity, that they will come forth in the resurrection of the dead, separately and singly, to be servants, okay, servants for those who belong to the family of God? Have you done that? Are you doing that? There's more. Okay, so this is in volume 1. That first quote was in volume 2. So 2, 1, and then back to 2. Okay. Choice between worldly things and exaltation. Do you want to go on in this brief span, which is called mortality, loving the fashions, the temptations, the allurements, all that the world can offer? Let me zoom in. Because they are pleasant, and then come up in the resurrection from the dead to be a servant, to wait upon those, quote, who are worthy of a far more and an exceeding and eternal weight of glory, end quote. That is what such persons are going to get. And if and it may be, if they are not honest and honorable, they may even go to the terrestrial or the celestial kingdoms and may miss the celestial kingdom altogether because they are going to receive according to their works. So in this case, he's primarily talking about those that are celestial, but that do not end up being sealed. But I think I think the same applies to the telestials and terrestrials as far as like being, because like the way that it's described, I think in the Doctrine and Covenants with celestials is that they become ministering angels, the ones that don't get married. Um, Dang, I think there was one other thing. Who desires to enter the eternal world and be a servant when the promise is held out that we may be sons and daughters of God? Yet there will be the vast majority who will enter into the eternal world as servants and not as sons. And this simply because they think more of the world and its covenants than they do of God and his covenants. Simply because in their blindness of heart they refuse to keep these sacred and holy commandments. Oh, what bitterness there will be in the day of judgment when every man receives his reward according to his works. So here he seems to imply um, terrestrials and telestials as well. Okay, so let's go back to the bees. So I think that you could maybe view this as like a foreshadowing of the eternities. Okay. All right. So honeybees are social insects. Okay. And that's what we're supposed to be in the church, is that's why we meet together as wards and stakes and all that, which means that they live together in large, well organized family groups. Okay. And that's the order that we have too, that Heavenly Father has given us. Social insects are highly evolved insects that engage in a variety of complex tasks not practiced by the multitude of solitary insects. So, in other words, because of their nature, because they're social and they work together, they're able to do more complicated things than if you just go it alone. Communication, complex nest construction, environmental control, defense, and division of labor are just some of the behaviors that honeybees have developed to exist successfully in social colonies. And I think those are the same things for us to successfully um, continue in the eternities. This is how a true society works: communication, complex nest construction, environmental control, defense, division of labor, so on and so forth. These fascinating behaviors make social insects in general, and honeybees in particular, among the most fascinating creatures on Earth. A honeybee colony typically consists of three kinds of adult bees: workers, drones are the males, and a queen. Several thousand worker bees cooperate in nest building, food collection, and brood rearing. So this is about creating a home, getting food, or the gospel, that which nourishes you, and then raising children. Build a home, gospel, raise children. Each member has a definite task to perform related to its adult age. But surviving and reproducing take the combined effort of the entire colony. Individual bees, workers, drones, and queens cannot survive without the support of the colony. Again, the colony is essentially a family, so they can't survive alone. In addition to thousands of worker adults, a colony normally has a single queen and several hundred drones during late spring and summer. The social structure of the colony is maintained by the presence of the queen and workers, and depends on an effective system of communication. The distribution of chemical pheromones among members and communicative dances are responsible for controlling the activities necessary for colony survival. If you don't know what that means, the dances, bees, like when they find like a good source of nectar, um, they have like a way to communicate that to other bees in the hive by doing like these vibrating movements which can give like very accurate directions of how to get to that source of nectar. So communication through those dances and stuff, it's necessary for colony survival. Labor activities among worker bees depend primarily on the age of the bee, but vary with the needs of the colony, right? Reproduction and colony strength depend on the queen, the quantity of food stores, and the size of the worker force. As the size of the colony increases up to a maximum of about 60,000 workers, so does the efficiency of the colony. All right, the queen. Each colony has only one queen, except during a varying period following swarming preparations or supersedure. Okay, so normally one queen unless swarming or supersedure is happening, and it'll go over what that means in just a second. Because she is the only sexually developed female, her primary function is reproduction. And you guys, we know that that's going to be obviously a big deal after this life. We know that our Heavenly Father has worlds without end and that his work never ends. So it's just nonstop populating of worlds and going through this process, these different generations on all these different worlds, right? So it's important. Again, if you are to be given that power, you better be worthy of it. You cannot populate worlds and be a sadistic um, person or someone that's apathetic. You have to care for all of those, all your children. Okay, so she produces both fertilized and unfertilized eggs. Queens lay the greatest number of eggs in the spring and early summer. During peak production, queens may lay up to 1,500 eggs per day. They gradually cease laying eggs in early October and produce few or no eggs until early next spring, January. Which this is kind of interesting because going along with the idea of the harvest and the second coming, I've proposed that maybe a time when the second coming would happen would be after winter solstice, because winter solstice is when basically the year really comes to an end. That's when you have the shortest day. The previous year, that's like the very completion is winter solstice, and then you start the new cycle the next day. And so it may be that if like for symbolic reasons that maybe um, Christ would come at that time as we're ready to open a new season of harvest during the millennium, right? Not the type of harvesting that we've been doing really for the last, or not in the same way that we've been doing it for the last 6,000 years, but this new era of the new millennium. And so it's just interesting, it happens with bees too that they kind of stop laying, and that's when you have that year's generation done. It's done by winter. Okay, moving on. The second major factor of a queen, the second major function of a queen is producing pheromones that serve as a social glue, unifying and helping to give individual identity to a bee colony. One major pheromone, termed queen substance, is produced by her mandibular glands, but others are also important. The qualities of the colony depend largely on the egg laying and chemical production capabilities of the queen. So she keeps the colony together with this, essentially this pheromone, this scent, right? So reproduction and keeping the colony together. Her genetic makeup, along with that of the drones she is mated with, contributes significantly to the quality, size, and temperament of the colony. Yeah, and that's how it goes. That's why that's another part of reproduction is you look for desirable traits in another person, and you know, not just physical, but like we as Latter-day Saints, we should be looking for others that are righteous, right? That's what you want to pass on. And that's ultimately what's going to affect you and your family, both in this life and I'm sure in the life to come. Okay, after mating, the queen returns to the hive and begins laying eggs in about 48 hours. She releases several sperm from the spermatheca each time she lays an egg, destined to become either a worker or queen. If her egg is laid in a larger drone sized cell, she does not release sperm. The queen is constantly attended and fed royal jelly by the colony's worker bees. The number of eggs the queen lays depends on the amount of food she receives and the size of the worker force capable of preparing beeswax cells for her eggs and caring for the larva that will hatch from the eggs in 3 days. So here you start to see the necessity of how she needs the, like it says here, this workforce that's able to sustain this, right? It's a very large task for just one person to do. Um, and so I think that might be where this comes in, where what we were talking about with Joseph Fielding Smith, how um, after this life, I wouldn't be surprised if those that go to a terrestrial in a celestial glory, like they end up working in some way, not as like slaves or whatever, but that their help is enlisted and they might have things that they're supposed to do to help forward the work. They themselves are not able to procreate, but there might be other assignments and tasks that they perform to help. So I don't know if they would just, the way that he says it here, it almost seems like people of our generation, you, me, our friends, our family, those who are terrestrial or celestial might be potentially assigned to you to help with your family. Um, it doesn't sound like they go directly to Heavenly Father. I don't know. Um, that might be the way that it happens. I'm not sure. Uh, One thing that's really interesting, though, and we're going to get into this in just a little bit, is when you look at Abraham in his family, I think that it's a type and a pattern of the eternities because you have Abraham, that's the male, right? He's the he's the whatever, and then you have his wives, and then you have his children, but he also has a bunch of servants. Now, I'm sure that in this story with Abraham, I'm sure that his servants and those that were part of his household, I'm sure that they independently received the gospel and received exaltation due to their worthiness and keeping covenants. But I feel like it's kind of like a prototype or a foreshadowing of the eternities, that's what a family looks like in the eternities. Um, Similar to like a solar system where I have this pulled up, where I think the way it kind of works is you have a male, right? The one that's whose main job is to create order, right? Um, Life also starts here. The light from the sun goes to the planets, and in this case, as far as we know, the only planet capable of producing life and sustaining life is the Earth. So the sun or the light from the sun comes to the Earth, and I feel like there's a reason why almost all cultures view Earth as a female, right? Mother Earth. And she is able to have the children and they live with her, right? And you think about a newborn baby, the newborn baby and children, they stay with their mom until they're old enough to do their own thing. They don't typically spend as much time with the father. They're more attached to the mom. And that's where they grow, right? And it's interesting because when you look at the heavens and how it's arranged, you have multiple planets here. And Some of them, well, none of them that we know of have life. And then on top of that, you have nearly all these planets have moons. If you go here, like for example, here's Jupiter, right? And you can see the different moons of Jupiter, although it only seems to show like the bigger ones, because when you go up here to moons, it shows you how Earth has one, Mars has two, Jupiter has 80, Saturn has 83, right? And this kind of makes me think about the whole idea with you have like this interesting thing that you read about in the scriptures about maids, right? Handmaids. For example, in Genesis 16, you have now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abraham, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. Uh, it may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Sarai. When you click on maid, it pulls up a couple interesting scriptures. In Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 to 31, it says, Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. And he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman, being Isaac, but he of the free woman was by promise, which things are an allegory. For these are the two covenants, the one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar, which I think that's Hagar, without the H. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of all of us, or of us all. So it's like he's making the distinction here between, like, spiritually those that are in bondage and those that are not, according to the gospel, right? Because he said that this is an allegory. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. So that's interesting. Thou that travail, okay, for the desolate hath many more children. And so, as far as like the gospel goes, the way that he's portraying it here is that Hagar was desolate. But so it's like, what's better, to be desolate and have lots of children, or to be of the faithful, and have your husband, which is like the promise of having children after this life. That's the way I could be like completely off with some of these things, but okay. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Doctrine and Covenants 132, verses 34-65. God commanded Abraham, and Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham to wife. And why did she do it? Because this was the law. And from Hagar sprang many people. This therefore was fulfilling, among other things, the promises. Therefore it shall be lawful in me if she receive not this law it shall be lawful in me if she receive not this law for him to receive all things whatsoever I the Lord his God will give unto him. because she did not believe and administer unto him according to my word. And she then becomes the transgressor, and he is exempt from the law of Sarah, who administered unto Abraham according to the law when I commanded Abraham to take Hagar to wife. So it's interesting here because it was the Lord that commanded that. Here, when you read the Genesis account, it says that basically like Sarah was the one that was like, hey, can you do this? But it was actually the Lord that commanded it. Um, and then I think what it's saying here, it just kind of confirms that she didn't uh, essentially live up to covenants and to the gospel, right? Isn't that what this means? Um, because she did not believe and administer unto him according to my word. And she then becomes the transgressor, and he is exempt from the law of Sarah. Am I right about that? This therefore was fulfilling. Therefore it was lawful in me, if she received not this law, for him to receive all things whatsoever I thought will get, because she did not believe. I'm actually not sure. I'm sorry. I don't know. You can look into that further. And then you have here in Genesis 30 this interesting account where you have the four wives of Jacob, right? Israel. Two of them were the daughters of Laban. He went there for Rachel, but then he was tricked and was told that he had to marry Leah first, and then afterwards he got Rachel, and then this is what happened. This is Rachel. Okay, Rachel was not having any children, and so it says here, and she gave him, Jacob, Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife. And Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called his name Dan. So Bilhah was the one that had the son, but it was Rachel that took him as her son. Okay, and it was Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, conceived again and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali, or Naphtali. I've heard it said both ways. So the same thing. Now the second son, Naphtali, she took him for her own. And then Leah, which was the first wife, when Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, a troop cometh. And she called his name Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. So here you have Leah and Rachel taking over the role of parent or mother to these children. And I don't know. I feel like this is like kind of like showing how things might be after this life, because you have these two wives that are of like lesser status, and it's the more it seems like the more righteous wife is the one that gets those children. It's like, so Bilhah is Rachel's maid, Zilpah is Leah's maid, and so they're like attached to them almost as though, almost like a moon. Okay, like here's a moon of Jupiter. Um, does it say which one this is? Oh, this is Io. And Io belongs to Jupiter, right? We have our moon. Let's go to our moon. Our moon belongs to us, to the Earth. Now, in reality, we know that the moon is actually like a higher world than the Earth is. Um, it's a terrestrial sphere. It says in the Doctrine, or I think it says in the Pearl of Great Price, or maybe it's the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about how the moon is that of a higher order than the Earth. I think it's in the Pearl of Great Price. There's the Earth right there. But we know that the moon is actually very important when it comes to the Earth. Um, it affects things on the Earth. It for one thing, it helps tell signs and seasons. We know that the Jews, they have a lunar calendar. The Hebrew calendar is lunar. The Islamic calendar is lunar. So it helps with time. It also affects animals and the oceans, right? It does a lot of things that helps the Earth be the way it is right now. And it also seems to be tied with well, okay, I'm not gonna go there, but it seems to have a special relationship with women. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. If you don't, you don't. Um, so I can't help but to wonder if that's kind of if the solar system. Okay, let me go to the solar system. I can't help but to wonder if the solar system is really kind of a symbol, a diagram of how celestial families work, where you have the one male. His job is to provide order and life to the rest of the solar system. You have these different planets that are part of this system, and they go around, and then they, in turn, most of them have these moons that help them. The same way that these worker bees um, basically serve the queen, right? And the queen is the one, like the Earth, like the Earth, that is actually supporting life. But in this case, I think it's also very similar to a flower. How just visually you have like the center right here, and then around you have many different petals, and each petal would be similar to like a hive. So you have this petal here, and in this hive petal, you have the queen bee, and then you have her servants that serve her essentially. And her servants are not able to reproduce except for in certain cases. Let's go back to this. Sorry if I'm just like all over the place. I thought I had this organized better. It's kind of hard. It actually took me a long time to put all this together. Okay, so let's go back to this. Um, okay, new or virgin queens develop from fertilized eggs from young worker larvae not more than 3 days old. New queens are raised under three different circumstances: emergency, supersedure, or swarming. So this is when they need to be produced. When an old queen is accidentally killed, lost, or removed, the bees select younger worker larvae to produce emergency queens. Now this is interesting because in mortality, I think that this in a way happens. You have a righteous woman that is destined to be exalted, and then she loses it. She's either killed spiritually, lost spiritually, or removed because she's not worthy to be a queen after this life, and so a replacement is needed. These queens are raised in worker cells modified to hang vertically on the comb surface. When an older queen begins to fail, um, decreased production of queen substance, the colony prepares to raise a new queen. Okay. Queens produced as the result of supersedure are usually better than emergency queens since they receive larger quantities of food, royal jelly, during development. So, in other words, when there's the emergency situation, like if the queen is killed, lost, or removed, then they have to hurry and get another queen. Whereas if there's an older queen and they can tell that she's getting older and she's starting to not produce as much queen substance, then they have more time to properly prepare a new queen. Um, like emergency queen cells, the supersedure queen cells typically are raised on the comb surface. In comparison, queen cells produced in preparation for swarming are found along the bottom margins of the frames or in gaps in the beeswax combs within the brood area. So I think the swarming, what that's referring to, is just like the natural. So if the queen is not lost or killed, and if she's not getting old and everything's just like fine, there's a point where it's like, okay, it's time to have the next, you know, get males and new queens ready to go and reproduce and do their thing. Okay, drones. Drones, male bees, are the largest bees in the colony. Again, this seems to fit the pattern. Like when you look at flowers, right? The male would be symbolically here in the center, connecting all the petals. In the solar system, it's our sun. Our sun is very, very large. Um, produces heat. By the way, my wife is always cold, and I'm always her heater whenever she's cold. Men have a higher metabolism than women. They literally produce more energy, more heat energy. Um, so flowers, this, and then you have like roosters, for example. I've talked about this before. How roosters, you typically have like maybe about 10 to 12 roosters per, or sorry, you have one rooster per 10 to 12 hens. That's typically the case, and they're larger. They're taller, right? These ones right here, these are hens. Yeah, hopefully you can tell. This is the rooster. You can tell roosters because they have these really big, long tail feathers, and then also like the feathers down the side of their neck. They kind of like appear. They kind of look like greasy hair. Like they're like really shiny, and they look like they're like oily, kind of compared to hens. But anyway, there's just like this kind of pattern, and I really do think that this is kind of how things work in the eternities. Um, okay, their main function is to fertilize the virgin queen during her mating flight. Drones become sexually mature about a week after emerging and dying instantly upon mating. So they have a very they have a very short lifespan. Although drones perform no useful work for the hive, their presence is believed to be important for normal colony functioning. So that's interesting. I'm not going to dive more into that right now. That would probably just make this all a little longer. But anyway, while drones normally rely on workers for food, so males, they rely on workers for food, they can feed themselves within the hive after they are 4 days old. Since drones eat 3 times as much food as workers, an excessive number of drones may place added stress on the colony's food supply. The drones may stay in the hive until they are about 8 days old, after which they begin to take orientation flights. A flight from the hive normally occurs between noon and 4 p.m. Drones have never been observed taking food from flowers. When cold weather begins in the fall and pollen nectar resources become scarce, drones usually are forced out into the cold and left to starve. Queenless colonies, however, allow them to stay in the hive indefinitely. Workers. We're almost done here. Workers are the smallest and constitute the majority of bees occupying the colony. See, this is like a thing here. Even though in this case the queen she's the mother of these different bees. And again, I'm not sure if like the telestials and terrestrials, if they end up serving us once we become exalted, or if they serve our heavenly parents. I don't really know. Again, Joseph Fielding Smith seemed to suggest that they might be assigned to your household. Um, and I don't mean to like sound horrible. I really think that this seems to be how it is. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was gonna say we know, like, we don't know what the final number is gonna be, But we learn in the New Testament that few there be that find the narrow path, the straight and narrow path. And I would tend to think that that's probably true between both us here in mortality, and then when everything's finally done and you take everybody that had to receive the gospel in the spirit world, I'm sure that that still applies. That there's probably not a whole lot of people that end up going the exaltation route, just because it's hard. And I don't know, but it makes sense that this kind of matches up, that the majority are not queens, that they're workers. Workers have specialized structures such as brood food glands, scent glands, wax glands, and pollen baskets, which allow them to perform all the labors of the hive. They clean and polish the cells, feed the brood, which are the babies, um, or the developing bees, care for the queen, remove debris, handle incoming nectar, build beeswax combs, guard the entrance, and air condition and ventilate the hive during their initial few weeks as adults. Later, as field bees, they forage for nectar, pollen, water, and propolis, plant sap. The lifespan of the worker during summer is about 6 weeks. Workers reared in the fall may live as long as 6 months, allowing the colony to survive the winter and assist in the rearing of new generations in spring before they die. Okay, laying workers. Okay, so workers can lay, okay, even though they're not a queen. It says when a colony becomes queenless, the ovaries of the several workers develop and workers begin to lay unfertilized eggs. Development of the worker's ovaries is believed to be inhibited by the presence of brood and the queen and her chemicals. So that's like what inhibits them, makes it so that they can't lay, is when the queen's around, mostly. The presence of laying workers in a colony usually means the colony has been queenless for 1 or more weeks. However, laying workers may be found in normal queen-right colonies during the swarming season. And when the colony is headed by a poor queen, so so basically, like, they're usually, I wouldn't say sterile, but they don't lay eggs unless like the queen is gone, swarming season, or if there's a poor queen, like a queen that's not producing. And I think that's kind of what happened in the story of Sarah and Hagar, or in this, like, this thing between Leah and Rachel, especially with Rachel. Rachel was essentially a poor queen, and so it's like she utilized this, where she took a worker, um, in her case a handmaid, and then she's the one that had a child for her. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. And of course, in this case, like, they took them to wife, so they didn't just like have a child. They entered into the new and everlasting covenant. I don't have that pulled up, but I came across that. It said that they were in the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, celestial marriage. Okay. In addition, laying workers scatter their eggs more randomly over the brood combs, and eggs can be found on the sides of the cell instead of at the base, where they are placed by a queen. Some of these eggs do not hatch, and many of the drone larvae that do hatch do not survive to maturity in the smaller cells. Okay, that is basically it. Um, this is not doctrine. These are just some of my thoughts. I feel like there's some pretty good parallels here, and I feel like this could be some of the deeper meaning of the beehive symbol. I could be wrong, but I think that a beehive kind of symbolizes the world of a exalted woman, essentially, and it includes the man. But it's almost as though if you were to like focus on um, the petal of a flower, in how that she's the queen. She's the queen of that colony. Um, oh, this is where I okay. This is where it was. We'll end on this. Concubines. Okay. So this is in Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie. And it says, sorry, let me get back to it. Zoom in. Don't know why it couldn't just leave it zoomed in. Concubines. See celestial marriage, plural marriage. In modern times, a concubine is a woman who cohabits with a man without being his wife. But, quote, from the beginning of creation, end quote, all down through the history of God's dealings with his people, including those with the house of Israel, concubines were legal wives married to their husbands in the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. Anciently, they were considered to be secondary wives, that is, wives who did not have the same standing in the caste system then prevailing as did those wives who were not called concubines. There were no concubines connected with the practice of plural marriage in this dispensation because the caste system which caused some wives to be so designated did not exist. So, according to this, that's it. It sounds like it was a cultural thing why Bilhah and Zilpah were they would have been like concubines, essentially secondary wives. But like I said, I think there maybe could be more to it than that. Um, it doesn't seem, as of what's revealed right now, that terrestrial or telestial women would ever have children. But I wonder if maybe they could. I wonder if you know because they still have I don't know. It may just be like Joseph Fielding Smith said that they like they're basically going to be sterile after this life. But I wonder if in some cases some of them would, just like Bilhah and Zilpah, if they would have children, but they just wouldn't raise them, that they would have children for the exalted woman that's in their household, if that makes sense. So sorry, I know that these are kind of like deep things, but this is just something that I've always been interested in this whole thing, the whole thing of bees and the beehive and why it's just all over the place because I grew up in Utah and I didn't leave Utah until my late 20s. So, you would see this all the time. And I guess I wanted to actually just close on this really. So when you look at a beehive or when you look at a colony of bees, let's just go back to this right here. I mean, what you see here, you see a collective, right? They all look the same. They make these cells that are hexagonal in shape, which is interesting because hexagons, that's what you have in the Star of David, is in the middle of it, you have a hexagon, right? There's actually really interesting things about this shape when you draw circles. Like you start out with one circle, and then you pick a point on the circumference of that circle, and then draw another circle of equal size, and then you take the intersection points and draw another circle, and then when you do that, you end up with essentially a Star of David, like when you connect the points. Um, I can't do that here; it's too hard to do. But or I don't have. Well, it's not too hard to do. I just don't have anything to show that. But it's very interesting that you end up with 6 points on the central circle. And then when you connect the points and you do it like this, you come up with the Star of David. And it's kind of like what this represents is the 6 creative days of work, or the 6 days of creation, right? And then the center kind of representing the seventh day, which is the day of rest, the Sabbath day. Anyway, bees in the Star of David. I think that's interesting. Going back here, so you have this kind of collective bees, and that's what we're striving to be. We're striving to be Zion, right? We're striving to be one in purpose, one of heart, have the same values. It doesn't mean that you lose your individuality. But on the other side of things, you have Satan's plan, which has always reminded me of this. This is Star Trek: The Next Generation, and there's this race of what they are is they're cyborgs. They're all these different alien races that have been taken over by this. These are called. It's called the Borg. Like this race of people, they're the Borg, and as you can see, they're very technologically based. And what they do is they go around the universe and they forcibly take people and turn them into these robot zombies, essentially. These drones. And the way that the story plays out is at first, it just seems like they're just a big, massive collective, and just all the drones are all the same. But later in the narrative, I don't think it's until the Star Trek, the Next Generation movies, you learn that at the center of it, you have these Borg queens. And they are actually free. These right here, these drones, they are not free. They're just they're workers, but they do not have. They cannot. They're not allowed to act. They don't have freedom. They're completely under control by the Borg collective. Okay, but these queens, they are the ones. There's actually more than one Borg queen, I think, but they are free and they direct the Borg. And this is essentially Satan's plan. Okay, opposed to this, where this would represent people that are free, people that have come together for righteousness' sake and to be a collective that way as a church, as the sons and daughters of God, you know, being equal but being free and joining by choice through our choices. Satan's way was more like this, becoming part of this collective where he's the only one that is acting and everybody else is being acted upon. Whereas here, everybody is acting. And, there's an order and there's a way of doing things, but through your free will, you act and you join it. You are not forcibly brought into it. So, okay, that's enough. I feel like I've just been kind of rambling. I hope it all made sense. But those are just some of my thoughts. Hopefully it gave you something to think about. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.